Hi folks, welcome back to the channel, and today I am going to be reviewing the 1990 film Jacob's Ladder. Like I said, Jacob's Ladder is a 1990 psychological horror thriller directed by Adrian Lyne, who for most of his life has been making erotic dramas like Unfaithful, Indecent Proposal. He even made Fatal Attraction. So the guy is mostly known for making erotic, romantic drama films. And this is one of the only times that he branched out and created a psychological thriller. The basic rundown of Jacob's Ladder is it stars a very young Tim Robbins playing Jacob Singer, a discharged Vietnam War vet who has returned home to New York. But even years after being in New York, after being in the Vietnam War, he's still plagued by the horrors that he witnessed during the war, such as his comrades being slaughtered and having to slaughter the enemies himself. These horrifying visions that Jacob has are represented by terrifying eyeless and faceless creatures that use these amazing special effects for the time of jerking their heads side to side, up and down, and it's sped up to create this unnerving effect where it looks like they're shaking their heads at lightning speed. And I should also mention that these creatures were the inspiration, the biggest inspiration for the creatures, and just almost the entire film in general was the inspiration for these Silent Hill games. The film also stars Elizabeth Pena as Jacob's girlfriend, who throughout the film attempts to comfort him and his suffering and his PTSD of the war, but sometimes she can just come off as careless, which makes sense because, you know, if you are living with somebody who has been in the war, there is a certain level of pity and sorry that you can feel for that person until their outbreaks just become annoying or intolerable. You know, if you've seen Homeland, Adrian Brody, his wife tried her best to comfort him, but in the end his antics just became too much, and that is almost what's happening in Jacob's Ladder. His visions start to affect his day-to-day life. There is the scene where they go to the party and he envisions a horrifying tentacled creature seducing her, and he just goes into this screaming fit. And when they get home, she says she can't take it anymore, which she said a lot throughout this film, so, you know, take that for what you will. She says she can't take it anymore. She said she's tired of his antics until she takes his temperature and realizes that he's burning up. And so her and the neighbors throw him into a tub full of ice, and this is where he begins to scream and have another panic attack. The soundtrack or ambiance also adds a layer of horror to the film. Soundtrack being composed by Maurice Jarre. Sorry if I mispronounced that. It really does set this tone for the grimy and almost dystopian world that Jacob is living in his head, because he's living in New York, which in and of itself is a grimy and depressing place to live. But as he walks through the subways, as he walks through the cities at night full of smoke, the ambiance and often the mellow and lush piano really adds this layer of sorrow and misery to the situation. It's not exactly Silent Hill ambiance where that was more experimental and industrial. This is more orchestral and cinematic themes, which can sometimes be jarring because I feel like films like this work better without music. Of course, this was the 1990s, and this was one of the first films of its kind, so obviously they were using orchestral music because that's what was hip back then. But I feel like if this film had little to no music or no music at all, it would have worked a lot better, but I can forgive it for that. It was the 90s. The film also stars Macaulay Culkin, which, fun fact, this film came out the exact same year as Home Alone, 1990, so that must have been one hell of a whiplash for Culkin. Macaulay Culkin plays Jacob's son Gabe, who we find out later in the film was killed in a car accident, and he just can't shake the feeling off. He can't shake the guilt and the visions of his son dying, to the point where when he's being dragged through the hospital, the hospital scene where he's being dragged through the bed and into the operating room, one of the most tense and like terrifying things I've ever seen in a psychological film. He sees visions of his son's bike on the floor. Throughout the film, he keeps remembering his son, seeing him in the window, seeing him walk down the halls. It honestly reminds me of Hereditary in a way, which I can't help but wonder if Hereditary was somehow inspired by Jacob's Ladder, being that that film also has themes of grief due to the loss of a young child. Jacob later finds out that his other wartime buddies are also suffering from these same exact symptoms that he is, and he wants to band them all together to sue the U.S. military, which when you first hear it, you're like, huh? How is he going to sue the U.S. military? What do they have to do with this? This is more like you should sue the enemy, you should sue the Vietnams or something like that. But when he bands them together and they all agree to, sue the U.S. military, he later gets a call from one of his friends saying that they've all changed their minds and basically just call him crazy and no longer want to help him in his pursuit of justice, which we can probably guess why, seeing as Jacob was kidnapped earlier than that and was basically told to keep his mouth shut. And later on we find out that it's because one of the chemists that Jacob worked with said that they had created a drug that they had administered to the soldiers that made them extremely violent and vicious, and that is the reason why they're all so messed up in the head. And it's also revealed that it wasn't the enemy who had killed them, it was themselves. They had all turned against each other like animals due to this drug, which reminds me of the drug the virus, the hate virus, or the rage virus from 28 Days Later, that basically turns humans into these bloodthirsty monsters who, they don't care who they're killing, they don't care who they're attacking, they just need to kill someone. There was also a deleted scene after this where the same chemist tells Jacob that he has the cure or the antidote for what he's going through. And it's a whole long 9-minute scene of Jacob taking the antidote and getting this just one last giant trip of seeing the monster crashing through the ceiling, and it honestly looks like something out of the Alien series, which I wish they would have kept the design of that. Well, they did keep the design of that monster, up to debate, because this scene was deleted, and I'm kind of happy it was deleted because this would have really taken me out of the film, seeing this giant monster crashing through the ceiling with its tentacles. I mean, we did see that in the party scene, but that was all sort of in the dark. You didn't really know what you were looking at. It was very mysterious. It caught you off guard. And what I like about that is that this film sort of blends, it sort of bleeds into the scenes, the scenes of the hallucinations and what's real sort of bleed into one another to the point where you don't even know it's real anymore. You're like, is this real? Is this fake? Is he cured? Is he good? Because there are scenes that trick you into believing that he is all right and he's cured, such as the antidote scene was going to be in the movie, and it was going to lead you to believe that he was cured, but it ended up not working. Which I really love when films do that, where they bleed those scenes of reality and nightmare into one another to create this uneasy tension of what's real, what's not, when is it going to be over, where you start to just be like, please God, let this be over for this man. At the end of the film, Jacob goes back to his old family's house, which I forgot to mention, he did have a family before he met his girlfriend, played by Elizabeth Pena, who was named like Jessie or something. And he goes into the house and sits down, and he has another vision of his son Gabe. And Gabe basically leads him up the stairs, and you see the screen get all bright and the windows and the light is like pouring into the room, and it all gets all bright and stuff, and you're like, oh, he's leading him into heaven. This probably means Jacob committed suicide. Jacob died of I don't know, maybe he died of shock or whatever. And then the movie cuts to Jacob lying in a medical tent in Vietnam, and it is revealed that everything that you just saw was a dream. or Vision, because earlier at the beginning of the film, Jacob was apparently discharged back to New York because of a near fatal injury, and apparently that injury did end up killing him. But before he died, I'm assuming he went unconscious and just had this entire like vision of his life back in New York with his girlfriend and his dead son, which in my opinion completely almost ruined the entire film for me. I know that this was one of the first films to do that. It was all a dream trope, but God, that does not make it any better. When that happened, when you do something like that, where the entirety of your character's build up, their arc, although you could argue that there was no arc in this film, but the arc of other characters, all that development and everything, all the time that you put into writing the script and everything, it all goes to waste when you pull an ending like that. When you pull the "it was all a dream" ending, or you pull the Mario 2 ending. Like, damn, did you really have to go ahead and crap on your hard work like that? Ignoring that, I mean, you could completely cut out the last 2 minutes or minute and a half of this movie, and it would be amazing, to where Gabe walks up the stairs with his father and they both go into heaven together. That would have been an amazing ending. In the what is it called? In the scene selection for the DVD, that scene is literally called Ascension. That scene is literally called Ascension. I would have loved for that to be the end of the movie. Just boom, cut to credits, that's it, we're done. Amazing movie. I would have given... You lost so much points for doing that crap at the end. Oh, it was a dream. He's laying in the hospital bed, and they tell him, and they say, well, he put up a good fight, but in the end, he died. And then they walk away, and then the movie's over. Like, that ruins it for me. It really just does... You really just, put a bow on it and shipped it out in the worst way possible. So all in all, Jacob's Ladder is an incredible psychological thriller with some of the best cinematography for a psychological thriller that I've ever seen. The ambiance, the acting especially. I should mention that the acting, especially mostly from Tim Robbins, is incredible. The faces he makes sometimes are kind of wacky. I mean, that's what acting was back in the 90s. Just incredibly weird, wacky faces to convey horror and fear and all that. It's definitely not like how it is now. I feel like we've progressed more into where we can make horror reactions in movies more realistic. Like, look at something like The Shining, look at Wendy and how amazing her acting was, but she won a Raspberry for worst acting. We're gonna get into that another time because I have a lot to say about that and just the Oscars in general. But some amazing acting from Tim Robbins. I'd say everyone else was a bit mediocre, aside from one of his friends who sort of calls Jacob to the bar and sort of breaks down to him that he's also seeing visions and that he can't even go back home because he's so terrified that they're in his walls. And it's just a sort of like really a scene where the character opens up to Jacob and you can truly see that he's distraught. And Jacob is just glad to know that he's not the only one who's facing these visions. But acting from those two was good. I also liked I'll say realistic reaction from Elizabeth Pena's character to Jacob's outbursts. You can't exactly expect everyone to be incredibly patient with you. There are going to be people who are going to get sick of you because you are not getting help. Although I do understand that something like that doesn't go away ever. Like, it's just the things that people have seen in war, and the things that people are seeing in war currently, as you know, we're going through a tough time where war is still very much real. Those things don't go away ever. They're going to stick with you forever. But the most you can do is try to get help and try to get better to a point where you can function comfortably around yourself and other people, because not only does this affect you, but it affects other people. So I kind of liked that realistic approach of, not even your own girlfriend or wife will tolerate your outbursts forever. There's going to be a point where they're going to be afraid, they're going to be upset, they're going to be annoyed. So I like that. Other than the ending, which completely ruined the entire goddamn film. I can't ignore the ending because it's right there. It's not like it was a deleted scene. If it was a deleted scene and the movie ended with Jacob and Gabe going to heaven, that would have been amazing. That would have been like one of the best endings ever. But no, it ended with it all being a dream, and very disappointing. But anyways, that is my review of Jacob's Ladder. Incredible psychological film. Give it a watch if you love horror, and especially psychological horror. You've probably already seen it if you love psychological horror, but if you haven't, watch it. I implore you. If you're a fan of Hereditary, and especially A24 films in general, because they do a lot of psychological thrillers and psychological horrors and dramas, watch Jacob's Ladder. You're gonna love it. And I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. And that's it.